But look, let's start on Europe. I know that it's an issue that's vexing you a lot, and I would like to talk to you about that. So let's talk about the Europe referendum campaign. What do you think the probability is at the moment of Britain leaving, voting to leave and then leaving?
Oh, I'm not a betting man, and I'm not going to start putting figures on that. But I think it could be jolly close. I think we've had years and years and years of, broadly speaking, a fairly sort of negative characterisation of Britain's commitment to our membership of the European Union. And of course, there are lots of things to feel negative about: the way it runs, what's happening in Greece, and so on. But I think the task between now and the referendum, particularly but not exclusively for the Prime Minister and the government, is to explain why, at the end of the day, in this footloose, fancy-free, globalised world of ours, we get more things done for ourselves by working with other countries in Europe.
Do you think the campaign on your side should be based on fear or hope and vision? Because there's a bit of a debate about which works in these kinds of things.
Well, it's got to be forward-looking. Of course it does, because this is about our future.
But scary statistics about how many jobs, phony statistics about how many jobs will be lost or how many companies will move out, or do you think it should be based on
I think above all it needs to be based on the realities of the kind of world which Britain now occupies. And I think at the end of the day, you either believe, as I do, that you can provide jobs and prosperity and safe streets and a clean environment better by working through this club of European nations than you can on your own. I mean, dare I say it, we made the sort of parallel argument in the referendum about Scotland's place in the United Kingdom, where thankfully the argument won out that we get more done by working as a family of nations rather than everybody pulling away doing their own thing. I think that basic instinct that in this world, which is full of insecurities and threats, there is safety in numbers, I think that's one that a lot of people, even people who don't like this directive or that directive, actually feel quite strongly.
It has been a famously difficult case to make, hasn't it? You found it difficult when you were debating Nigel Farage. It just feels as though the British don't have an affection for it. I mean, they may use their head and say, oh, perhaps you can persuade me, my job is safer. But it's been very difficult to make the case. Do you think the Brits, in their hearts, are closer to the US or to continental Europe?
I think the sort of psychological, almost emotional circumstances in which the United Kingdom joined the then European community was in many ways less emotive than, say, if you were the founding member states, Germany, France and so on. It was peace over war. If you were from Spain or Portugal or Greece, joining the European community, the European Union, was a triumph of democracy over fascism. For us, it was done collectively back then in the early 70s with a bit more of a sort of shrug of the shoulders, oh, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So I think there's always been a pragmatism about our approach to the European Union. I think it's a bad thing.
Closer to the Europeans? Do you think the average person closer to the Europeans or closer to the US? Which one do they feel is more of their cultural sibling?
I personally feel British, but also European, and also feel great affinity with our cousins in America. Of course, the great irony is that if we were to pull out of the European Union, of course, we become much less relevant to the United States, and that special relationship, however you want to characterise it, will also be significantly weakened, because in so many respects the fact that we stand tall in our own backyard allows us to stand tall not only in Washington but in Beijing, Tokyo and all the other capitals of the world.
Does it worry you that effectively the voters in this country, in fact in pretty well every country at the moment, seem above all wanting to give political establishments a bit of a kick up the backside?
Yeah.
And with the likes of you and the establishment saying stay in the EU, you're kind of giving them an open opportunity. Here's how to give Nick Clegg a kick up the backside, vote to come out.
Well, you'll be relieved to hear that I'm not going to lead quite with the chin like that. I'm not looking for, nor do I in any way wish to occupy some great leadership role in this campaign. It's something I believe in, but there are many people who will be able to make the case more effectively than I will. At the end of the day, of course, this is a referendum put to the country by the Prime Minister, so the most important character of all is what the Prime Minister says to the British people after his renegotiation. But of course I agree with you that we're going through a prolonged period of political volatility, and we arguably have suffered from it, not just here in the United Kingdom, but across Europe, where you're seeing parties that didn't even exist a few years ago rise, where you're seeing old, venerable parties decline, you're seeing the rise of nationalism, of chauvinism, of identity politics, which is in many ways a sort of politics of us and them antagonism, which is replacing or displacing the old left-right
And
pendulum.
This referendum could end up being one of those, couldn't it?
It could. Yes, it could indeed, which is why I think the arguments, which have to be realistic, heartfelt, persuasive, but not sort of over the top, not hyperbolic, need to be deployed as soon as possible.
When you were working with David Cameron, did he give you any clues as to what he wanted to get out of the renegotiation, or is he just trying to renegotiate what he thinks he can get? Because no one seems to be
No, we didn't discuss
very
it
clear.
because you know, my party always had. I mean, you've made a bit of a play of inconsistency. In fact, we were by far the most consistent party on this issue about when we felt a trigger would be sort of triggered for a referendum. The Conservatives, as you know, this is now history, changed their minds. We're now going to have a referendum. Now we must focus on that. So we didn't really debate their plans for renegotiation. My own view of it as an outsider now is that there are some things which I think are of real substantive importance. So, for instance, the point that George Osborne, I think, has particularly emphasised, I think he's been right to do so, is the relationship between the Eurozone and the need for greater integration, fiscal integration and so on, policy integration, banking integration within the Eurozone, and the relationship with us as by far the largest non-Eurozone economy of the European Union. That is something which does need to be sorted. I so happen to think you don't need to necessarily sort of hold a gun to your head and say you're going to pull the whole thing down to get that sorted, but it does need to be sorted, and it'll be good that it will be fixed in the renegotiation. Other aspects of it are a little bit more cosmetic or symbolic.
We haven't had a chance to speak to you since the general election. David Cameron, in his conference speech, said there are two words I love most are exit and poll. I'm just fascinated to what you felt that night when you saw that exit poll and as the rest of the night came through and you realised it was, if anything, worse.
Oh, well, of course, a whole lot worse. No, it was absolutely heartbreaking because we'd worked so incredibly hard, not just during the campaign.
And you really hadn't sensed it coming?
Oh, of course. I mean, it was since one bit of the writing was on the wall that we weren't going to do. We were not going to return all of our MPs. We knew that. We were braced for some losses. But nobody, and by the way, literally nobody expected the result. I mean, the Conservatives themselves did not expect to have...
What did Miriam say to you? Did she say, quit the Commons now? Was she hoping you weren't going to win your seat so you could just get out, leave the country?
No. Look, everybody in the Liberal Democrats and people close to us, Miriam included, was sort of heartbroken that after all the work that we put in, I think, maybe mistakes here and there, misjudgments here and there, but with the interests of the country at heart, came to naught. And clearly what we, with the benefit of hindsight, what we did was we put the country first, but did so in a way that was damaging to... I mean, the thing that sort of... with the passage of time, the more interesting question, which only the further passage of time will answer, is it possible to have the kind of politics that I believe in, of reason, of pluralism, of give and take, in a system which discriminates very, very heavily against those kind of compromises, where every compromise is shouted down as a betrayal, and where, as we have had in this instance, you have governments returned with, 24% of the eligible vote.
You're getting to sort of abstract politics. I'm more interested in the personal, if I can just...
Well, I'm probably a little bit more interested in the abstract rather than talking about the personal.
It's how you have the resilience to take such rejection with such a
well,
problem.
You shouldn't go into politics. Listen, look, I'm a human being. I'm not a sort of. I'm not a robot. Of course, it hurts. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But there's no point me coming here and sort of mawkishly licking my wounds on national television. You shouldn't go into politics, and you certainly shouldn't assume sort of senior office in government, thinking that you're sort of entitled to a sort of breezy ride thereafter. Politics is a rough business. It's a brutal business. People go up, people go down, and you have to be braced for that. I'm incredibly proud of what we achieved. I think we achieved remarkable things in remarkably difficult circumstances. And if you think back what the country was like in the run-up to the 2010 general election, in the wake of that terrible heart attack in our economy, it is quite extraordinary what we achieved through a novel form of government. And much of that would not have happened without the sort of plucky resilience of the Liberal Democrats. So I'm proud, but I'm also very, very sad of how it turned out for us in the ballot box. But I'm also equally confident that we will, it might take some time, bounce back.
Bounce back. But very briefly, what's your biggest regret in your period in government? I mean, what did you get wrong?
There are so
Libya,
many.
What was it?
There are so many.
We've only got about 20 seconds.
Well, if you want a surprising one, I think in many respects, the optics of politics made it almost impossible for people to understand what Liberal Democrats did in the coalition. When sitting mute next to David Cameron at Prime Minister's Questions every week was a sort of terrible kind of encapsulation of what our critics said about us, that we were somehow just sort of passengers in a government, where in fact we were active architects rather than observers of the government. And maybe my biggest mistake was sitting where I did at Prime Minister's Questions, and I should have sat somewhere else.
Next coalition
Indeed.
Deputy Prime Minister should bear that in mind. Nick Clegg, thanks very much
you.
indeed.